The records show it departed from a private boat launch at 9:56 a.m., arriving at the island by 11:14 and staying there until 4:30 p.m. In audio of a call around that time to a private towing company obtained from the same records request, the caller explains a mechanical issue with the boat.
We're sinking. Can you all please come?
The towing company dispatched reaching out to a local captain for help.
It sounds like a bunch of kids on board on Horn Island, and he's saying the boat is sinking. He wants you guys to go out there and unpump the boat and then tow it in.
Records then show the boat being towed slowly from about 4:31 until 5:25 before getting back to normal speed. The boat then returned to its original location at 5:44 without Nolan Wells.
Why do the two accounts of Nolan Wells's last afternoon on that island contradict each other so completely that his own family's attorney has called it out by name? Why does a young woman who was supposedly the reason Wells stayed behind say something almost opposite to what his friends have said about that same conversation? Why does GPS data now exist that tracks a boat to a specific house, while the person who owns that house still hasn't been named? And why, weeks in, is Wells's phone still sitting with his family's legal team, instead of fully in the hands of the sheriff's department investigating his death? Stick with this one, because almost everything below either contradicts something you've already heard about this case, or connects a piece nobody's put together yet. This story moves fast, and what was true last week is already out of date. So if you want every update the moment it breaks, hit subscribe now, because this one has more contradictions than any before it. According to friend Triseston Shepard, Wells stayed behind on Horn Island because he'd met a young woman there, planning to catch a ride back later on someone else's boat. That much has been public for over a week. What's new is what the young woman herself is now saying through attorney Ben Crump. She's told him Wells said the opposite, that he was heading back to get on the boat with the boys, not staying with her. Crump laid it out plainly. The boys say Wells stayed for the young woman. The young woman says Wells told her he was going back to the boys. Both can't be true. Somebody's account of those final hours doesn't match what actually happened.
The young lady make a statement and she says, well, Nolan and I finished talking and Nolan said he was going back to the boat. And then the boys on the boat said, no, Nolan told them he was going to stay with her. And so they are conflicting. She's saying he went and got on the boat. They saying he didn't get on the boat. So which is it? And all we know is Nolan is dead.
ABC News says it's attempted to contact her directly, and she hasn't given her account publicly, only through Crump, an attorney with an obvious interest in raising doubts about his client's friends. Take it seriously as a real discrepancy. It isn't yet a confirmed account in her own words. Here's what it changes, and what it doesn't. If she's right, Wells never intended to stay at all, meaning something shifted between that conversation and him being left behind. If the boys are right, she's misremembering or describing a different moment in the same conversation. Either way, the last real account of what Wells said before he disappeared doesn't line up with the outcome. Sheriff John Ledbetter has stuck to the same working theory throughout. He suspects drowning, while stressing the investigation stays open pending the medical examiner. The Mississippi Department of Marine Resources logs GPS on registered vessels, and CBS News obtained the tracking data for the boat that carried Wells's group to Horn Island. It left a private dock at 9:56 that morning, reached the island by 11:14, then pulled away again at 4:31 that afternoon without Wells aboard, heading back to the same dock. From there, it moved into Fort Bayou around 5:52, returned to the dock by 6:06, then turned up at a different boat launch at 7:19, before being hauled overland to a residence in Biloxi. According to Crump, that residence belongs to the young man who owns the boat. Wells's own phone turned up at that same house, tracked there by his mother, Christine Wansley, through the app Life 360. The boat, its owner, and Wells's missing phone all converge on one address, and nobody's named it publicly yet.
Melissa Miller was at Horn Island on the 4th. She says there were hundreds of boaters there for the holiday.
It's just a big community. Everyone goes out there and, has a good time.
She also says it's normal to leave cell phones on boats.
None of this tells us what happened to Wells. It does remove the guesswork about where the boat actually went that evening, and it ties two threads together, the phone and the boat, that had been treated separately until now. A boat headed straight home doesn't usually make 4 stops first. That alone doesn't prove anything. Boats get moved for ordinary reasons. But it's a more complicated evening than we went home, which is exactly why both investigators and the family's own team are treating this log as worth real scrutiny. NBC News obtained a recording of the boat's operator radioing for help that afternoon.
It sounds like a bunch of kids on board on Horn Island, and he's saying the boat is sinking. He wants you guys to go out there and unpump the boat and then tow it in.
The bilge pump had failed at the island's west tip. The boat was taking on water. He wanted it towed in. A dispatcher asked if everyone aboard was healthy. He said yes. That call lines up with when the GPS shows the boat leaving. It confirms a real mechanical emergency happened. It doesn't confirm whether Wells was ever expected to be one of the people still aboard, since, by every account, including the contradictory ones, he'd already decided to stay before the pump failed. This settles one small piece. It doesn't touch the bigger question of what Wells actually said and to whom in his last hours on that island. The fight over the phone. The phone itself has become its own separate battle. Crump has called it strange for a teenager to be without his phone at all, and stressed that Wells's parents found it before investigators did. But Sheriff Ledbetter has said Crump hadn't turned the phone over to his department at all as of earlier this month. The family was holding on to it. That shifted this past week. When Wells's mother met with District Attorney Angel Myers McIlrath, both sides agreed to a mutual inspection, the family's experts and the DA's experts examining the device together. That's real progress from where things stood days earlier. It also means the single most talked about piece of evidence in this case sat outside law enforcement's hands for over a week. The friends have their own explanation. Shepard says Wells left his phone on the boat's dashboard when the group got in the water, same as roughly 15 other phones that day, and his uncle has called that completely normal boating behavior. Whether that explains everything is still an open question, especially given what turned up once the family actually looked at the data. An attorney reviewing the device has said its digital footprint is effectively tamper-proof, meaning its history can't be edited without leaving a trace. And yet, when Wells's parents cross-checked his location history across 2 different apps, Life 360 and Snapchat, the 2 records didn't match each other. Nobody's explained that mismatch. If the underlying data really can't be altered, that discrepancy gets harder to write off as a glitch. Christine Wansley met face-to-face with DA Angel Myers McIlrath this week, the first time since Wells's body was recovered, in what Crump called a respectful meeting. The outcome? Once the sheriff's department finishes its investigation, the case goes to a grand jury. The DA's office has been direct that this isn't a sign charges are coming, or that anyone specific is suspected. It's standard procedure for any death this county can't immediately explain, and McIlrath's office routinely holds these meetings to walk families through the process and connect them with victim services. A grand jury referral, by itself, tells you nothing yet about guilt or what investigators have actually concluded. 2 pieces of viral content have driven a lot of the noise around this case, and Shepard has personally taken both apart. The first is a video shot from a boat that appeared to show an argument on the island with Wells at the center of it. Crump referenced the clip directly, saying he understood it to show Wells demanding his phone back. Shepard says the voice everyone assumed was someone confronting Wells was actually his own, and that he wasn't even in the disputed portion the way it's been described online. The second is a photo shared further by Crump's own Instagram account that appeared to show Wells at a pool party in the early hours of July 5th, after he was supposedly already missing. Shepard says it was actually taken on June 27th at a different location entirely, more than a week before the trip. If that holds up, the photo has nothing to do with this timeline at all, despite being treated online as a major clue. Shepard has also pushed back on the framing around race itself. He's biracial and has said openly that he believes Crump built a racial narrative before the facts were in, describing it as a story that isn't there. He and his friends have faced real threats since the case went viral, and his stated wish is simple: let the investigation run its course and remember Wells as the sweet guy he was. That doesn't erase why race entered this story in the first place. Wells was reportedly the only black person in the group photographed with him that day, in a town that's close to 80% white by recent census figures. Reverend Al Sharpton, standing with the family, has said something about this case doesn't sit right with him, tying that directly to the racial makeup of the group and Mississippi's own history. A friend who was actually there is pushing back hard on that framing, and the family's advocates believe it's a legitimate part of why this case hasn't moved faster. Neither side is likely to settle that question on its own.
We did no wrong here, and we don't understand how we're getting so much hate behind it. We all cared and loved Nolan, and nobody wanted to see Nolan die. Nobody wanted to see his life be taken so short. They met that day, and it was kind of one of those things. It did come off that day that he really did like her, but that was the only time they've ever hung out, was at Horn Island on July 4th. I want everybody just to relax and let everybody mourn the loss of Nolan, and let us remember him as in, like, the sweet guy. I think everybody needs to let the investigation continue and let the facts be shown.
Local Judge Ashley Cole's son, Warren, was reportedly among the last people to see Wells alive, around the time the boat trouble started. Cole has since deactivated her Facebook, saying photos of her minor children began circulating as speculation spread. It's a reminder that the scrutiny here isn't confined to Wells's own family. Not every friend agrees with Shepard's framing either. Javon Williams has said the account that circulated most, that Wells simply chose to stay behind, doesn't match the person he knew, a different kind of doubt than Shepard's, aimed at whether Wells's decision-making even makes sense, rather than at defending the friend group. And Wells's father, Elmore Wansley, has gone further than either of them, saying repeatedly on national television that he doesn't believe his son made that choice at all. That's not an attorney building a case. That's a father, on camera, rejecting the account his son's own friends and investigators have leaned on. Wells's friends made it back to the mainland the afternoon of July 4th. Hours passed with no word. It was close to 11 that night before his mother learned Nolan hadn't come back. The search pulled in the Jackson County Sheriff's Department, Mississippi's Department of Marine Resources, the Gulf Islands National Seashore, the Coast Guard, and the volunteer group United Cajun Navy, whose national vice president, Brian Trasher, says his organization stayed in contact with Wells's mother from the moment she reported him missing. The Coast Guard logged an official bulletin the next afternoon. Wells's father went out that same morning with his son's former coach, searching on his own before the wider effort had mobilized. A park ranger found Wells's body off the island's northwestern tip the morning of July 6th, roughly 48 hours after he was last seen alive. The FBI is now assisting Jackson County, a shift Ledbetter has confirmed, describing the Bureau's role as backup support rather than a takeover. He credits recent public tips with real, if unspecified, progress. No official cause of death exists yet, from anyone. The independent autopsy the family commissioned, expected around July 10th, has been delayed over the logistics of moving Wells's body, with no new date announced. Coroner Bruce Lynn confirmed early on that the swimsuit on the recovered body matched what Wells wore that day, closing off one thread of speculation, but the core medical question is untouched. No one has been arrested. No one has been charged. Despite the contradiction, the GPS data, and the delayed phone handover, none of it amounts to an accusation against any named person yet. The Congressional Black Caucus has weighed in publicly, pushing for a faster, more transparent process, while Mississippi's Department of Public Safety has said every case gets its own timeline and can't be rushed to match public expectation, a fair point about due process that still leaves a grieving family being asked to wait. Wells was 18, a 2025 Ocean Springs High School graduate and wide receiver at Southwest Mississippi Community College, due back for preseason training around the time he disappeared. His coach describes someone who led by example and treated people with respect. His mother calls him a special soul who was always lifting others up. The family retained Crump 3 days after he went missing. Shepard, for his part, just wants people to remember his friend as a sweet guy, not a symbol in an argument he never had a say in. 2 things actually move this forward: the mutual phone inspection now underway, and the sheriff's department finishing its investigation, which is what triggers the grand jury. Neither has a date yet. Also worth watching, whether the young woman ever gives her own account directly instead of through Crump, since her own words would resolve more than anything else on the table right now. And keep an eye on the delayed autopsy, and on whoever's name eventually gets attached to that Biloxi address. This case has changed more in the last 2 weeks than most cases change in months, and there's no sign of it slowing down. That's exactly why it's worth being here when the next piece drops. So subscribe now, because we'll be back the moment there's something new and confirmed to report.